Hello and welcome back to the Nasty Metal Production channel here at YouTube, and welcome to another album of the week. This is episode number 177, and today's episode, well, I am celebrating the 40th anniversary for Restless and Wild, the classic fourth album from Accept. Balls to the Wall may have broken the band in a way to the US market, but it was this album that pretty much solidified the band's legacy in the annals of heavy metal in general. So without further ado, let's definitely take a look into pretty much one of my absolute favorite metal records of all time, definitely my absolute favorite album from Accept, and just probably even my number one favorite album from 1982. So there you go. Let's get into and just diving into and dissecting what is, I would just consider an historic album in heavy metal, Restless and Wild. There you go. This, of course, follows 1981's Breaker, which definitely was seen as a transitional album from at least the sound of what they had prior to the first two records, and of course what would end up being developed and just morphed into for this album right here, which really just became fully realized and really gave way to Accept's true sound. And just even for like Udo Dirkschneider and everything, that would just continue on even to like Udo's solo career, everything. This is the album that pretty much defined Accept. I know normally that, again, that accolade for most people would go to Balls to the Wall, but personally it goes to Restless and Wild, and I will definitely get into that and at least elaborate on that as this video goes on. But let's definitely at least dive in a little bit. Now, prior to the recording of Restless and Wild, Jorg Fischer had left the band, and they kind of were left without a bit of a guitar player. However, prior again to the recording of Restless and Wild, a guy by the name by Jan Comment had joined the band briefly before the release of the sound, but did not participate in the recording. That at least ended up happening there. And of course, everyone would believe that Herman Frank at least had played on the record, but he didn't join the band until after the release of Restless and Wild. So let's definitely get that out of the way. So let's definitely at least right now focus on the recording process of Restless and Wild, which definitely took from February to March and into June of 1982 at Dieter Dirk's studio in Cologne, hopefully I'm pronouncing all that correctly, Germany. And this is where most of the recording sessions took place, and Wolf Hoffman pretty much recorded all of the guitar parts for this album, including the solos and everything on this album. So this album was pretty much recorded as a 4-piece, not as a 5-piece like the previous 3 records were recorded. And of course into the later period, at least until you probably get into the Resurrection days in the 1990s. But this album, of course, was recorded as a 4-piece. Was it like Objection Overruled wasn't the first Accept album to be recorded as a 4-piece. So just letting that out of the way. So there we go. I really can go as much into further on other little production, facts, whatever. But you know what? That's probably that all that just needs to be said. So eventually, the album is of course mixed, even though again it was recorded and pretty much produced by Accept. So eventually, the album sees its release in October 2nd of 1982 through Brain in Germany. That again features the cover art of the twin guitars, being set on fire, the burning twin guitars, which were taken from the same photo sessions that the back cover for Breaker was taken from, and the back cover for Restless and Wild on the Brain pressing of Restless and Wild, again, just shows that how charred they all got and burnt after probably taking the fire extinguisher to set the fire out, And again, I own a copy of Restless and Wild on Brain, so I own an original Brain pressing, and then of course I own the Epic / Portrait CD pressing from like 1995, or at least a reissue of the 95 pressing, where it features the cover art that ended up being used by Heavy Metal Records and Portrait in both the UK and the US a year later, because of the reason why this album ended up being released by 1983 in both the UK and American markets and everything is because of, well, technically the first album I think was released again in like 1980 in the US and stuff, whereas I'm a Rebel what was released in, was it like 1981 or something? There was a little bit of a weird situation there. That's why Breaker ended up being released in 1982. So to kind of keep it up, Restless and Wild had to be, its American and UK release date had to be delayed by another year. So it just would be, of course, maybe months or so after, its release date in October for Germany. But still, the artwork, of course, that ended up being used for the both the Heavy Metal and Portrait pressings of this album, and Epic, and so on in other parts of the country, of the world, is basically a live shot, which also ended up being, which at least just the shot of Udo, basically just holding on or grabbing on. It looks like he's choking, though, Peter Baltz, the bass player, and that shot also was just at least blown up more and cropped, and was turned into the artwork for, the Restless and Wild and Balls to the Wall compilation album, which was my introduction to Accept, and I'm going to get into that real soon. But there you go. So again, this cover art being used for like the American and UK pressing, so in a way, you probably right now are seeing this cover. So we're just definitely gonna at least take a turn back into the original cover. We're gonna transition into the Burning Twin V guitars cover that was on the Brain pressings and other German pressings of Restless and Wild. So there we go. Now, I could have brought up this little piece of information as part of the recording process, but you know what? This is perfect for this right here, for the actual main part of the Album of the Week episode, where I end up giving you my elaboration and my thoughts on Restless and Wild. Now, I'm going to read you a quote that was taken from, back in 2018, even though this was actually, I'm reading the Blabbermouth page, actually from December 17th of 2018, but it was taken from, former WCW, Smoky Mountain Wrestling, WWF/E, and current AEW wrestler Chris Jericho's Talk is Jericho podcast, where Wolf Hoffman was a guest on, and he talked about the just the overall story and the concept for the song Fast as a Shark. So I'm just going to read you this here. So, this again is a quote from Wolf. So, I clearly remember how we wrote the song and how it all came about. It was really the drummer, Stefan Kaufman, who came up with the crazy idea of playing double bass, double kick, all the way through. And we had never done that before. So he came up with that basic idea, the concept, and we sort of had the riff. That was fairly easy, and then I wrote that weird middle section for it. But then, at the very end, we wanted to have an intro for it, or something, and I thought about it. And I came up with the idea to put on a record that's completely the opposite of what's about to happen, just to fool people into thinking something else. I thought everybody who buys a record would think that they might have bought the wrong record. That was the idea. You go to the store, you buy the new Accept record, you put it on and say, what the hell? Somebody put the wrong record in the sleeve. That was the idea, and I thought maybe we'll use an opera part or something. And then we already had recorded the basic tracks, and we were looking for any intro to use. And we went actually through the record collection of the studio owner's mother. We were, again, Dieter Dierks' mother. We recorded at Dirk Studios, where the Scorpions used to record at and all that. And there was Dieter Dierks' mother. She had a record collection, and we asked her, what kind of records do you have that we can possibly steal and abuse, scratch out? Because we wanted to rip the needle off. And she had some children's records that Dieter Dierks, as a kid, actually sang on. So there was all these German traditional folk songs that everybody heard as a kid. And there was the one song, it's called Ein Heller and ein Batzen. I probably butchered that. That had this middle section where there's no lyrics. Because we thought, German lyrics? Nah, we don't want that. Because we didn't really want to sound too German. We wanted it to be international. And that little segment is Hi, di hi, do ha, all that, again, the intro and everything, which that's what we used. So we borrowed that album and put it on and ripped the needle off and kind of destroyed the record from Mama Turks. So there you go. There's the telltale for, of course, what pretty much became the infamous intro for basically the song that forever reshaped metal history in 1982 and 1983. Now, I should definitely bring up this little piece of information that ended up being brought up. And it's interesting, and it's a part of Fast as a Shark too. And again, I'll get into all of that. Again, as far as, the song itself and the album. Again, apparently, little piece of information also. Apparently, there's some controversy also that surrounded the song that Wolf Hoffman didn't really bring up in his discussion on Chris Jericho's Talk is Jericho podcast episode, where he brought up the story about the intro for Fast as a Shark. Well, apparently the band soon found themselves in an unintended controversy. However, even the song, again, even though the song dated from 1830, it was a popular marching song during the Nazi era and still held that connotation for many listeners, a fact the band was unaware of at the time. So, and again, according to Wolf Hoffman, so out of a funny little idea, we created somewhat of a monster. And sure enough, he really did create a monster, not because of out of controversy, just because of how the sheer velocity that Fast as a Shark contained as a song and what it unleashed upon the world musically and creatively. And again, it set the tone for Restless and Wild. And from there on, talk about one of the most greatest metal records ever get released. And this is coming from a guy who played the shit out of this album for long periods of time. And this is the album that basically turned me on to other German metal bands, because prior to this, I only knew of Scorpions. I could talk on and on, about the songs, going more in depth, but I think everybody right now knows every one of these songs and probably know them and every note of them, and at times can just remember everything. And there's a lot of variety though on this record though. There's plenty of headbangers on this one, again, besides the aforementioned Fast as a Shark, which again, for people that did buy that record, they probably were a little bit surprised by that intro. But if you ever ask everyone that ever bought this record, it was actually one of the icings on the cake for this album, because when it finally came to the song and they've just, first hearing it for the first time, they were just like, fuck yes, this is not something I was expecting, but this is a great welcome, and it really made them a fan from there on. And just from there, from Fast as a Shark to the title track, which is a great galloping metal song, to, of course, Ahead of the Pack, Demon's Night, which is definitely more of a slower song, but goddamn, the song just packs a lot of punch. Now, and other great fucking tracks on here. Flash Rockin' Man, and then of course there's so many great songs on this record that to me is what makes this my absolute favorite album from Accept. And it's one of my go-to albums for them. Now, it's actually the only album that I own on vinyl record, or on record. But, goddamn, when I'm in that mood for that sort of, that just straight-up classic heavy metal sound, I tend to go for Restless and Wild than I really go for, like, Swimming for Vengeance. Or even, like, Blackout from Scorpions. And again, I love Scorpions. But when I'm just in a mood for just something that's a bit more raw, more feral, and just a lot more metallic, and just has that sort of a more of a dirtier kind of sound. I mean, even like in the best way, because Wolf Hoffman's guitar tone on this one is so very distorted. I mean, he already had a tone on the first 3 records, but for some reason, the tone on this album on here just sounded a lot more. You can really tell he turned the amps up even more higher on here, and the gain is just cranked up more, and it's why I think that the guitar tone just sounds a lot more raunchier on this one, and it really kind of created a tone that became Wolf Hoffman's signature sound, and it continued on into like Balls to the Wall, Metal Heart, even like Russian Roulette, and even to this day, even though it's definitely a little bit more updated, his guitar tone, like on the ones with Mark Tonillo on vocals, but it's still the same tone that he pretty much created here on Restless and Wild. And it really reshaped Accept sound. It reshaped Dirk Snyder's just approach to songwriting. It really reshaped everything for Accept. And this was their defining record, in my opinion. Probably everyone else's opinion. Restless and Wild was the defining Accept record. And you could tell right from the get-go that they were not going to change every bit of their sound. Yes, things got a little bit more commercial later on at times, but there still was that signature sound to Accept. So this really was a true definitive record for Accept, and you can just hear it in a lot of these classic songs on here. But there's also plenty of fun rockers on here, very much in the sort of Crocus or Saxon, or even at times a little bit like the AC/DC kind of tradition. It definitely in songs like, for example, Get Ready, which definitely has that classic AC/DC boogie to it in a way. It's got that the same pattern. It's just a freaking great track too. Very catchy. A lot of hooks to this song. And same thing even like Don't Go Stealing My Heart Away, which I'm surprised wasn't a big hit for the band. I'm surprised it wasn't even a main single, because it's a really catchy song, and it should have got a lot of radio play. And again, since we're talking about that sort of AC/DC style formula, to me, I would say Don't Go Steal My Soul Away has it all. This really this should have rivaled You Shook Me All Night Long. This really should have rivaled any of the classic AC/DC songs, because it just has a lot of that girth to it. Hell, it should even like what rivals some of the, at the time, that were very radio friendly, Rainbow songs that got a lot of commercial airplay. This should have rivaled every one of those, and yet it didn't. And I think it really should have. It's a great fucking track, and one of my personal favorites when I first heard it. Since they kind of bring up my introduction to Accept might have been at least through the song Balls to the Wall. However, it was that Restless and Wild and Balls to the Wall compilation album that it really kind of made me wanting more from Accept. And again, when I first heard Fast as a Shark, I'm just like, holy shit. Here I was like being introduced to a song like Balls to the Wall, and due to its sort of, again, very anthemic vibe to it. And again, I've always kind of I would say Balls to the Wall is another one that kind of had that sort of AC/DC sort of vibe to it. Again, probably remind me a little bit of like the riff to like Jailbreak to an extent, though it's a bit more, has more of a metal edge to it, yet if it was played with like more Judas Priest like. But Fast as a Shark, since at this point I was already being introduced again to the more earlier stuff from Metallica and like Slayer and Megadeth and Anthrax and so on. This was just one of those, like, Fast as a Shark just like made me go, holy shit, this is fucking heavy. This is fast. This is ferocious. And it definitely created a fan in me. I just was a fan from the beginning, and I obviously years later I ended up even more, starting to kind of discover more of Accept's discography. And again, this was the album that I would say of all the songs on that compilation one, though, it was the Restless and Wild songs that really kind of just jumped at me the most, and that's why Restless and Wild ended up becoming the first album that I ever purchased. An actual Accept record, of a full-length album. It was the first one I ever purchased. And again, finding a copy of On Brain out in the wild was at Recycled Records, 2013 or 12, whatever. And I just oh fuck, this is great. And again, it was a Brain pressing, and again with the Burning Twin guitars, I had to have it. The V guitars, I just had to have that copy. And that's been my copy the longest time until upgrading now to a CD copy. Because again, I don't have my records with me down here right now. I don't. So I just wanted at least to have a copy of Restless and Wild. Because again, it is still my absolute favorite Accept record. And bar none, it is my absolute favorite Accept album. And at this point, when it comes to my rankings, I probably definitely put Breaker. It's kind of a tie between Breaker or Balls to the Wall as my second favorite. It's like there are some days where it's like, yeah, I probably favor Balls to the Wall a bit more to Breaker, but then there are days where I favor Breaker more than Balls to the Wall. So it's kind of almost a tie there. But definitely, at least my top three records for me are definitely Restless and Wild, Breaker, and Balls to the Wall. And right there, where I rank Balls to the Wall and Breaker are kind of off and off. It's really undefinitive, but they're definitely in that top three spot. All that top three. But for me, Restless and Wild is definitely at the top there. Just to continue on, other great songs. I mean, there's definitely some more slower songs. Shake Your Head definitely is kind of more of an anthemic song, and I really also enjoyed that song very much. But Neon Nights, which is probably the album's, it kind of pushes it to being almost a power ballad, but it's not really. It's definitely more of a darker kind of song. I would say it kind of belongs in the sort of same league as a Beyond the Realms of Death from Judas Priest, or the Lady Wore Black from Queensryche. It's that same sort of similar song structuring and same idea, where it kind of gives you the idea that it's going to be more of a ballad-like track, but as it goes on, it's definitely not that much of a ballad. It's just more of a slower, more darker, just different atmosphere to it, and it just has a really dark feel to it, and I've always liked it, and it's easily one of my all-time favorite Accept songs to begin with. And it took me years to really kind of really grab my head around Neon Nights, but that would have been up to 2008, because by 2008, when we're listening to most of that Winning Combinations or that Combinations album, whatever, that features, that's just songs from Restless and Wild and Balls to the Wall, I was just re-listening to Neon Nights, and just somehow it just clicked with me. It freaking clicked, and I'm like, oh, this is fucking great. And for days, it had been stuck in my head. I was repeating every bit of the note for Neon Nights for days. And I was at the time, it wasn't nothing much to do anyways in 2008, living in that trailer in the trailer park, whatever, up there. And I just, just finding things to do to keep myself occupied. And that's where music really became a big a part of me during those periods, was basically my music collection. And I was starting to listen and being more turned on to other different bands, because of that. When you're obviously bored as fuck during that period, especially as I was in 2008. The things that I would do to keep myself occupied and to make just to entertain myself was either video games or music. And music really became an even bigger part of me than I think ever before, even though I was really much into getting more into music and stuff, especially the hard rock, heavy metal genres. But by this point, because of bands like Accept and Merciful Fate and even Diamond Head and even discovering Sweet Savage through Metallica and everything, I was starting to do a lot more different. I was starting to discover more and more different bands, and that was really in the more obscure metal genre of the 1980s. And so those days of just being completely bored and trying to entertain myself, that's when I started to find new reasons to really love about Accept and really start digging deeper into other sort of different metal bands from that period. And that's where I just say this is just one of my all-time favorite metal records, is just because what it did for me musically and what it did for me collective-wise and who I am today and what I've gotten into and why I've got this vast collection of different bands, and when it comes to information and knowledge, is all because of bands like Accept and Merciful Fate and Saxon and Diamond Head and all those kind of stuff that just really put me onto this rabbit hole. So this is just one of those beginning records for me, and that's why I always will hold this album in such a high acclaim. Again, it's just a great fucking record to throw on, and I just love it for every one of those reasons. It really made me a fan out of Accept, and why I've also even took any sort of interest in even diving into Udo's solo stuff, and that really, I found some great fucking records, and even Udo stuff has probably become just as more of a favorite than Accept stuff. You know, it's just it really made me more aware and just turned me on to different aspects of the genre in the 80s, and it turned me on to different bands that ended up becoming some of my favorites. So that's just where I'm at. It's just great. But yeah, Restless and Wild, up there is just one of my all-time favorite albums, and obviously what a barn burner of a record. And to me, this is the definitive Accept record in many ways. You really can't you really can't say anything bad about this one. I don't think you can't. There's really nothing on here that can be said that's bad or anything. It's got different varieties. It's got enough for different people with different genre tastes. It's all on here. Fast songs, slower, mid-paced songs. It's got them all, and it's just done in a way that was done tastefully and is just very innovative to an extent as well. Wolf Hoffman just had a very distinctive tone. Udo had that distinctive voice to him. And Stefan Kaufmann, I think, was a fucking great drummer, even though eventually, by the time he started doing more with Udo Dirkschneider during the solo period, he went to being more rhythm guitar player, or solo-wise, whatever, he started doing more guitar stuff. But guy's a fucking beast anyways. Peter Baltz has a very distinctive bass tone. Every one of them did. So, fucking fantastic. So after this album again, Herman Frank eventually joins the band, like I stated, and history is born. They're obviously getting to becoming a much more bigger act. They're getting more airplay. They were kind of getting a bit more notoriety with the Breaker album, but this is the album that really kind of propelled them further, and I would say this one that it just solidified them as a premiering German metal act. And this is the album that basically almost every other German metal band on the Mausoleum label as well, and other sort of different obscure labels like Noise Records or, again, Earthshaker Records and other ones that were part of the Gamma label, the GAMA label, and other that distribution label that had other different record labels under it, like the Scratch Records label or the Hot Blood label, all those kind of different ones. That was all those German metal bands at least based their sound and their style, whatever, just their construction off of albums like Breaker, Restless and Wild, and Balls to the Wall. They all did. And going to like bands like Running Wild, Blind Guardian, Halloween, and just all those other great fucking bands that were on that label, the Noise Records label. Even Sinner, Matt Sinner, pretty much ended up changing up his sound in a way for like the Danger Zone record to pretty much still to coincide with the shifting and change that an album like Restless and Wild did for the German metal bands. Everyone basically was trying to chase after this sound. And that's where we also got a lot of those other sort of stuff like Sodom, of course, Crater and Destruction and Living Death and Tankard, all those other and fucking great bands in Death Row, even though they were definitely much more aggressive. Though I would say Living Death might have stuck a little bit more to the tradition of Accept, especially on the Metal Revolution record, which a lot of Accept overtones are on that album in a way. And again, talking about another distinctive vocalist in the metal genre, again, Thorsten Bergman. Very distinctive voice, though he doesn't really sound like Udo Dirkschneider, but you can tell he probably got some inspiration from a guy like Udo Dirkschneider to be at least very distinctive. But I would say Metal Revolution really is the one that just comes close at times to pretty much the formula of Restless and Wild. And it's a freaking great record too, but you can tell there's a lot of Accept influence on Metal Revolution from Living Death, but a lot of them. Running Wild, to an extent, pretty much had some of those Accept leanings a bit. There, though, it was a little bit more darker, a bit more gothic to an extent, especially on like the Gates of the Purgatory record, but they're there. Every one of them at least had a bit of that Accept influence, especially with Halloween on their earlier stuff, especially Walls of Jericho. Really, you can hear the Accept influence. This was really the most premiering influential band in Germany, and every other band afterwards was trying to sound as much as they can like Restless and Wild and Balls to the Wall and Breaker. So there we go. So that's it. It's a classic record, again, seeing its 40th anniversary. So for any of those that ever lived with listening to Restless and Wild, if you have any positive or negative comments about this album, you can leave them in the comment section below. But if you've never listened to Restless and Wild from Accept, just like what in my public little announcement thing or whatever that I gave at the end of my Album of the Week episode for Volume 4 by, at Black Sabbath, I'm going to say the same thing. You really shouldn't have been going this far into my video for Restless and Wild. You shouldn't have been. You probably should have paused it or stopped it and went to probably find yourself a copy. It's not that difficult to find. You can go into your local record store and they'll have a copy of Restless and Wild. It is easy. It's along this album and even Balls to the Wall. They are probably the easiest to find of the Accept records. Unless you're good enough and if you're lucky enough, you might even come across it at times. If you're going into like an actual very distinctive record shop that at least specifies or in like vinyl records, you might come across a copy of maybe the first two records, especially maybe the first album, which I did once and I never picked it up though. And I never picked up the original, an original pressing of the self-titled debut album. But it was in great shape. It was by the time I found Restless and Wild, so I probably should have picked it up then too, but I didn't, and I should have. So there you go. But again, you should be doing the same. Just find yourself a copy and just dive in to an album that reshaped the metal sound in Germany and everywhere across the world. So there we go. I hope all of you enjoyed. This is Every Thrash I Sing, I'm out, and I'll see you all later. Take care, everyone.